Good morning. I never really met Philip Ochieng except through his articles. I remember thinking when it was shared that he had been promoted to glory, something about PO, and I kept thinking, who is PO? But all the same, I want to derive joy in reading excerpts from the fifth columnist biography. And this is a section that talks about his career. And so here it goes. Learning to snoop for stories. Shortly after Kenya gained independence, Ochieng worked with the Ministry of External Affairs for about 2 years before George Githii, then editor-in-chief of The Nation, hired him as a reporter in 1966. Before then, the latter-day fifth columnist had already made the first tentative steps into the world of letters. While serving as a protocol officer, Ochieng began his first contribution in the world of journalism. He wrote numerous letters for the Daily Nation's Letters to the Editor page, mainly on what he describes as bureaucratic inefficiency and the emergent corruption and tribalism in President Kenyatta's young government. Such was the fervor in his letters that Githii noticed them and opened the door to Ochieng's long career in journalism. Githii offered him a job as a reporter. Ochieng tendered his resignation from the civil service and joined the Daily Nation. Ochieng argues that becoming a journalist would allow him to use his brain, something the job of a protocol officer in the foreign ministry denied him. As a protocol officer, you are not really the decision maker. You do not get to use your brains. You are just required to be very well dressed, he says. His long journey from a cab reporter to the highest echelons of journalism in East Africa's newsrooms had just begun, a journey that has seen him play an important role in shaping the growth of journalism in the region for decades. Becoming a columnist. Unlike many other journalists, upon being hired as a reporter, he proved to be of much use besides writing news. He was entrusted with a weekly column titled Commentary. Not every journalist, in a sense, not every editor has that opportunity. You must be good at something to earn it. That column firmly established his name in the country's media circles and beyond. Describe with big words. Ochieng's style of writing has been the subject of debate for a long time. Many readers said they needed a dictionary close by when reading Ochieng's articles. His style triggered a debate on who he really writes for. It is a question that annoys the fifth columnist. If you want me to help you, then you must struggle to come up to where I am, because I will not stoop down to your level, he tells off his critics. He does not believe a dictionary would help to understand the message in his articles, because it is more about knowledge than complex words. What would help in this situation, he believes, is for people to read widely. He is not only impatient with readers who accuse him of writing for himself, but also fellow journalists who do not read books. Reading should be the chief of occupation for every journalist, according to Ochieng. A journalist should be able to quote poets, historians, scientists, and European writers at will in his writing to spread knowledge. In Dar. Ochieng worked in Dar from 1970 to 1973. He was hired as a reporter and gained entrusted with a column, The Way I See It. General Ulimwengu, who joined the newsroom as an intern from the University of Dar, said of Ochieng, in Dar, Ochieng was viewed as an enigma. To me and to many people around him, he was phenomenal. I had never met anyone with the breadth of knowledge that Ochieng possessed. He could hold his own in discussions of history, anthropology, sociology, literature, theology, etc. Such erudition, such readiness to share knowledge with others. Chief sub-editor for The Nation. Roy Gashuhi says, Ochieng was an interesting fellow in the newsroom. Above the clatter of typewriters, especially towards the evening, when reporters and sub-editors were busy trying to meet deadlines, Ochieng, then chief sub-editor for The Nation, could always be heard shouting. If he mentioned your name, what would follow was almost obvious: arrive here, quote unquote, to seek clarification from the reporter or news editor about a story with missing facts and the like. After giving instructions on what changes to be done to the copy, he would send you away with one word: foolish, quote unquote. However, this was said in a light touch, and journalists never got offended, and those who could pick a few tips on writing a good story actually did. In Kampala, Ochieng also edited the Sunday Times of Uganda. This was after his resignation at The Nation in 1981. Ochieng worked for The Nation for 5 different times and would leave in between to pursue other interests. When he resigned, he was the chief sub-editor, but he stayed at the Sunday Times of Uganda for only 3 weeks, and while at it, ended up in one of Uganda's infamous cells of death for one of his sharp "take no prisoners" writing. Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, his friend, who hosted him after his release from the cells, says of Ochieng's contribution to journalism: people who are literate and of age in the 1980s in Uganda certainly remember his role in Ugandan journalism and his writing. But does Professor Mamdani think Ochieng would have made significant contribution to journalism in Uganda had he stayed on? I have no doubt that Ochieng would have played a noteworthy role in advancing the cause of political journalism in Uganda had he been able to stay longer. Kenya Times editor-in-chief. John Agunda, who worked with Ochieng at the Kenya Times when Ochieng was the editor-in-chief and later at The Nation, says of Ochieng: he came across as a very meticulous and creative man and a workaholic. He was always at his typewriter, either writing something to go into the following day's paper or working on his manuscripts. He was also a very good teacher of up and coming journalists. Thank you.
Good morning. How are you all? My name is Ekta Dodia, and I'm going to talk a little bit on Mr. Philip Ochieng. As a journalism student, I haven't personally ever met him, but however, I have, how do I say it? I have read a few of his articles. And as my fellow colleague before said, that you need a dictionary when reading some of his articles. So I'm going to present something to you from his linguistic gems you won't find in a dictionary. So if anything that eats is an eater, then whatever it eats must be an eaty. Am I right? I gathered this linguistic gemstone from our own newspaper, he says. Indeed, I must agree that "iti" is a handy little word for all that dainty things for which we lick our lips in any restaurant. The problem is that I cannot find it in any of my dictionaries. But apparently, our journalists and other graduates of our education system have been taught that whenever the doer is a word with an ER or OR ending, then the doer, the receiver of the action, must end with an double E. And so, thanks to the donor community, all our esteemed newspapers are happy to inform their readers that a country like Kenya is a dunny, sorry. Does that make sense to anyone? So yes, he has amazing words. He taught us a few different things that a dictionary may not teach us, for sure. Thank you.
I think we now have Lucy. We now have Lucy Ochieng, the daughter of Philip, online, and so we'll listen to her. And due to public demand online, the video that was played earlier was not clear. People didn't see it. So there is the video and a PowerPoint presentation that we'll play. Then now we go to the next section. So there's been requests online for us to replay that. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. I am the third born from my mother, but we all know that we had a sibling in the States born of a Black American mother. My very earliest memories of my father, I remember him carrying me on his lap always while talking to his friends. And most often than not, he could burn me with a cigarette. Of course, not deliberately, but accidentally. That is the way my dad displayed his love for me. We were very much alike character-wise. We were people of very few words. So right from the beginning, all we had for each other was extreme mutual respect for each other. And then came the disappearance of my dad from our lives, of which we couldn't understand as his children. His life just became a mystery to us. I remember my last born sister, Luoch, when friends could ask her, where is your dad? Because people could see everybody's dad, but not ours. Luoch could say that the dad is dead. My mom could understand, but she was economical with the information. Later, we came to understand that people viewed him as a government critic. And so he could step on many toes. And it didn't make his life comfortable within the country. So he had to disappear for a while. My dad made a comeback. We didn't even know he was my dad until somebody called his name, Philip Ochieng. That's when we knew now that is dad and he has come back. And from that time on, we want to say that dad was out to compensate his absence because he displayed a lot of love for us. The way he displayed his love for us is he spoiled us a lot, including our children. He gave us too much. He spoiled us to a fault. So he also had too much love for my late mom. And he could say something like, he will only shed a tear when my late mom died, when in case my mom dies. And when my mom died, I didn't see him shed a tear. So, but that was the beginning of his deterioration. That was the beginning of his loss of enthusiasm. The death of my mom, it affected him. And what can I say about his language? Even as we were marveled at his children, we used to marvel at his English. Sometimes we could even feel that he's breaking English. There was an occasion he was talking to somebody on the phone and he was saying, I don't hear you. Personally, I thought he should have said, I can't hear you. He kept saying, I don't hear you. I was wondering, is this good English? Daddy corrected our speech up to the last minute when we were relocating him to the rural area. There's this, we liked saying this phrase like, we liked saying, what is it? We like saying square A. But Daddy could not take that. He could tell us there is no square A. It is square 1. And me, I was wondering, as long as the point has been driven home, but he could not take it. You had to say the right thing, square 1. Daddy, in September, he was to be 83 years old. This coming September. Of course, he was old. He was beginning to lose his memory. But I don't know why in our minds we never really thought Daddy could go, even at his age. But now he has gone. All we can say is just that we thank God for we celebrate his life because he has lived a long life. Thank you all.
My name is Juliet Akenya.
Philip Ochieng Otani was born in 1938 in Awendo, present-day Migori County. He started his education at his Manyata village and later joined the Alliance High School in Kikuyu. In 1959, P.O., as he was fondly known among colleagues and peers, became a beneficiary of the famous Tom Mboya airlifts to the USA.
Barack Sr. and I were in the same plane that Tom Mboya organized for 81 students to go to America.
He was enrolled at the Roosevelt University, but in his own words, they drank more beer and painted Chicago red.
One of those 81 produced her, another produced Barack.
My name is Juliet Akenya Ochieng. I came here from Los Angeles, California in the United States because my father lives here. My father, Philip Ochieng, lives here.
Back in Kenya, Philip Ochieng started his journalism trade in 1966 at the Nation Media Group. He would then start the East African media space, working back and forth in Uganda and Tanzania before settling back to Kenya. P.O.'s long journey in the media saw him become a towering figure, scaling the heights of a cub reporter to editor-in-chief. His brilliance, many of his colleagues agree, was matched by his willingness to mentor young journalists, most of whom were untrained, just like he was. P.O. was often described as meticulous and a creative workaholic, a good teacher of upcoming journalists. In the newsroom, he was a stickler of grammatical accuracy, a hard-to-impress editor. To his readers, His sharp techno prison pieces were riveting, just as they were educative. And in 2015, on the occasion of the launch of his biography, aptly titled The Fifth Columnist, Ochieng had this to share with young journalists.
Some of us are getting old. Some of us are approaching the grave. Somebody, one of you, some of you must take the courage and write the stories of some of these people.
Those of you who read Philip Ochieng's column need to give him a standing ovation.
In 2018, PO was accorded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Media Council of Kenya,
Hearty congratulations.
capping his 5 decades in the media. In the same year, he celebrated his 80th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mama.
In his death, many have said Philip Ochieng's pen has gone silent, but the ink on his writing will not dry.
As Shakespeare says, so ends the story.
Fare thee well, Philip Ochieng, the meticulous wordsmith.
Words that speak across a generation. I started off by asking, he's gone, but is he really gone? It's left us with such a volume of knowledge, of intellectual discussion and discourse. And we heard from the students, it is still inspiring generations. He is still speaking. He is still speaking from beyond the grave to another generation and inspiring them to be better, to be bigger, to be bolder. Those who were in the newsroom, I think, will attest, it could take hours to settle on a word for a headline with Philip. It had to be right. It had to be the right word. And he enjoyed that intellectual back and forth and getting it right. That sort of sense of perfection, the sense of duty to the public, I think is something that we must strive to entrench again. Not saying that it's gone, but we must always strive for it. I think also for me, he had a great respect for the journalist, the person. Very often we see them as mtu wa mkono, go and get the story. I remember him bowing to pressure, not to use your byline if you didn't agree with what was in the story. Philip would not force you to put your byline on anything that was not your word. Very, very ethical man. We want to move ahead now to hear from some of the titans, the new day titans of the newsrooms. We want to hear tributes from media houses. And I think today we're going to hear from people who ordinarily you could never get them to sit in one place at one time because they tend to be busy. This event is that important to them. And the testimony to the greatness of the man that we celebrate today. So let me start by inviting, although we've invited from the major media houses, they speak for all of us, they speak for every media house, they speak for the independent journalist, the correspondent, all those who were touched, inspired, and who worked with Philip Ochieng. And I will start by calling on Polilado of Radio Africa Group, if he is ready. Oh, okay. Let's go to Joageo from Citizen.
I don't know if it's morning or is it, oh yeah, it's still morning, right? I had Rose use some terminology of Titan, and I think it's fair to say that must be the height of flattery for anyone to call some of us titans when we are talking about Philip Ochieng. Um, I, as a true son of the soil, I perhaps should have started by saying my names are, and apart from the rage that I'll get from Joe Dindo, I think that's the mere thought of what Philip would have thought about that would keep me awake the whole night. So uh, I want to say that unlike some of the people I see in this room, I never had the privilege of working closely with Philip. Philip was this enigmatic figure, almost a mythical figure that some of us heard about when we got into the newsroom. And even for the period that we worked in the same building, I met him a couple of times, but not in any way as to say things that would be uh, experiential in that way. But what I find so amazing is that the Philip that I read in those columns is the Philip that I hear many people talk about here. So I believe that it was a truly authentic person. Um, I never sought to find out some of the more mysterious things we had about him, such as that he never used to have a mobile phone, that he claimed it complicated his life. I never asked Wangedi whether that was true. There was also a rumor that he never drove himself, and I never again sought to find out because such was the almost mysticism that surrounded the persona of Philip Ochieng as we were getting into the newsroom those many years ago. So as we are here to celebrate the life of this great journalist, I think many of us would be reminded of just how important our trade is, because this is someone who had a great impact. Just listening to the very different generations of people who have eulogized him since he departed just a couple of days ago, I think is testament to the great journalist that Philip was and the great legacy that he has left, even as we sit here today to remember and to celebrate the footprints, the many footprints that are truly eternal that he has left on our shores as he passed by here. Many, of course, will remember the grammar lessons, but I think that they were really more than that. I think Philip, as some people have noted here, had this unique ability to basically discuss everything under the sun and do so with a considerable degree of competence that would inspire anybody who had an interest. It is only Philip who would explain with a straight face in some of those columns that the word Oriental had certain roots in the Luo language, and that was quite interesting when I saw that, because Philip Ochieng was many things. He was both intellectual and journalistic. I know that Professor Nyabuga will ask me whether those two things don't usually go together. But anytime people move to the academy, there is always fear amongst us as journalists that we have finally lost them. But I think Philip was able to straddle both worlds of intellectualism and hard-nosed journalism that would deal with day-to-day questions, even though he dealt with them in his own way. And Philip was, as someone said, he was cantankerous and provocative, and he was also annoying, but he was so beautifully so that he got away with it, that you would not read his columns and feel nothing. That was Philip. And I think that that is a great lesson for us. We always say in this business that if you did something that nobody said anything about, then perhaps you didn't do anything at all. And I think Philip in very, very special ways. He had what I think some people have rightly said. He had almost a certain kind of literally impunity. I had the students who were talking about the license he had to even attempt to create certain words. And of course, many of us who are Kenyan would know the kind of impatience he had with things like I can be able to do something, me, I, like, for example, the big quarrel about several times and severally, the question of continuously or is it continually, and all of these things we will keep remembering. And for some of us who sub-copy, some of those things will hit you, and then you can remember a certain column that you read by Philip Ochieng. So I think that as we are here celebrating, we must remember the many things. Actually, when I was looking at reading a few things that people have said, I bumped into a certain interview that he did with someone who was doing an academic paper. I think it should have been probably 15 years ago. And so Philip is quoted because this person, I think her name is Rebecca, was trying to find out something about the use of language in Kenyan newspapers. And he did a content analysis of the Sunday Nation. And so he interviewed Philip about the kind of environment in which they did their trade. And Philip said this, and I'm quoting, "We have a problem that some of our staff can't think in English, but rather in their mother tongue. This affects the quality of the newspaper in that thinking is done in the mother tongue and translated into English." Then he said there's an even more serious problem. We have in Kenya today people who are neither efficient in their mother tongue nor in English. They are tongueless. They are ignorant. They suffer from speech illiteracy. If somebody tells me you are lost, I immediately shoot back that is not English. That was Philip. The things that we say all the time and imagine that they make sense, and he didn't fear. Have you ever found words that everybody uses that you almost think correcting them would be a terrible thing? So he had that courage to stand up for what he truly believed, at least from seeing his writings. So as I finish, I think that this period of reflecting back on the life of such a great journalist to have graced our lives as fellow scribes, as some of us who are walking in his footsteps, standing on his shoulders. I think what this moment calls for us is for us to get back to the basics of our business. I think there's so much that we've lost along the way as journalists, as circumstances change, as the environment in which we work has changed. But I think that the writings and the general behavior of this great man in our midst should push us to get back to square one, as someone said, about what is truly important about the work that we do. That even though technology has moved some ways since the days that he entered a newsroom, that the work we do as journalists has not changed, even if the means, the tools, and perhaps the environment in which we do it may have changed considerably over time. So as I finish, I am not typically given to quoting Shakespeare, but what else can anybody quote when we are talking about the memory of Philip Ochieng? And so I will go a bit cliche and just quote the famous oration of Mark Antony at Caesar's funeral, that here is Caesar, here goes Caesar. Shall we say here goes Philip, from amidst whence cometh such another? I think it is a question we must ask ourselves. Are there more Philips left in our midst? Are there people who will stand for the straight and narrow of our business. People not cut corners with how journalism is supposed to be done. I think that's a challenge that Philip Ochieng leaves us with today as we remember his well-lived life and as we await for somebody, hopefully, to stand someday and say certain things about us when we go that same route. Because at the end of the day, I think it is what people remember us with that will really count. And so let me also say, and so ends the story. Thank you very much.
We're now going to shift online. To those of you who are joining us online, we're going to now hear from Bernard Momanyi, representing Capital Group. I understand he has dropped out. While we try to get him back, let us hear from the Standard Media Group representative, Ochieng Rapuro. Welcome.
Good morning, friends. I hope I'm audible enough. I have very unstable. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm seeking guidance from the technical team. Should we? Okay, we're going back to Bernard Momanyi from Capital Group. And like I said earlier, they speak for all of us, not just for the group they represent.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not able to start the video from my end. I joined you this morning to mourn a great man. A man who corrected almost everybody, even corrected his own newspaper. You read a column and you will see him pointing at mistakes that were either in his own newspaper, the Daily Nation, or the Standard, or any other writing that he came across. And this was a courageous man, a man who believed in a different kind of English, because whenever you read him, you will always want to seek guidance from the dictionary, which unfortunately those who work very closely with him say he never believed very much in. This is a man who never shied away from introducing his own words in English. And today, I keep asking myself, in this journalism career, as journalists, as editors, what will we leave behind? Like PO, as he was fondly remembered, referred to, has left behind. The legacy he is leaving behind with the use and mastery of the English word. he nurtured all of us through his column, those who never missed to read his column on Sundays. And you'll always, after reading his column, you'll always tell yourself, really, there are things you really will take so long to understand as far as English is concerned. Because then you are left wondering, is it Philip who is right, or is the dictionary? Yes. So to me, I will say the legacy that Philip Ochieng has left behind, I'll propose either to Kenya Editors Guild or Media Council to come up with an annual award for journalists in Philip Ochieng's honor. I believe this will be the best way to honor Philip Ochieng. And like I said, as journalists, as we practice this profession, one day we will live in whatever form. What legacy will we leave? I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Momanyi. I can now call, is Rapuro with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Is he?
Hello?
Okay,
Can you hear
let
me?
me move then to Nation Media Group's representative, Pamela Sitoni, who also is our,
Hello.
we're proud to say, our highest ranking woman in the big media houses. Pamela?
Rapuro is also on the line and I can hear him well, please, moderator.
Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me? Moderator, please. I think there's a problem on your side in the room.
Okay. Forgive us, we're having a little bit of internet and connectivity issues. Let's go back and try to hear from Rapuro on behalf of Standard Media Group.
Hello. I hope I'm audible. There's an echo.
From my side, you are audible, please. From my side, I can hear you very well, and I see many comments that have come that you can be heard.
We can hear.
But, oh, you can hear me. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My tribute to Philip Ochieng is both from a personal standpoint and from a professional view. I met Philip Ochieng in life only twice, and in very brief stints. First, as a student at the University of Nairobi, and second, as an aspiring copy editor at Nation Media Group. During my second year at the University of Nairobi, I shared a room with a reggae enthusiast who not only changed my perspective on the learners of that genre of music, but also inspired me to write a story about Rastafarians. Kenya Times was then located across the road next to Lillian Towers. And one Monday morning, I gathered courage, walked across the University Way, and asked to see Philip Ochieng, then the editor-in-chief, to present the story to him. He spent not more than 5 minutes looking at the handwritten script I had presented to him, and politely dismissed me with a promise that he would look at it. I left with a sense of resignation that his famous distaste for lingual mediocrity and inquisitive eyes that escorted me out of the door had trashed my copy as a monumental piece of literary comedy. To my surprise, 2 weeks later, the article was published as a spread across 2 pages of the newspaper, giving me my very first piece of published work. The second time I met Philip was at Nation Center when he administered to us a test in our quest to become sub-editors with the media group. I never made it through that test. Many years later, reflecting on those particular encounters and gaining a proper understanding of the doyen of language that Philip was, I appreciated that I did really not make the cut during that interview. By the time I landed at the University of Nairobi, I had read Philip Ochieng multiple times. I had grown up as a young man in love with literature, fiction, and philosophy. Back in school, I had read so much of European literature. I enjoyed Shakespeare, relished the works of James Hadley Chase, Agatha Christie, and Sherlock Holmes. Later in life, as I read more of Ochieng's work, I came to appreciate the value of philosophy in the mastery of any discipline. The gem in a restless soul, never satisfied with the status quo. And at Standard, we have a really rich archive of Ochieng's work with us to keep us or in his memory. Obviously, unknown to him, Ochieng's literary prowess presented a very inspiring challenge to me as an individual. I began to vividly consume the works of Greek philosophers such as Plato, Socrates, read the thoughts of Aristotle, Voltaire, Hegel, Immanuel Kant, only in my own attempt to put up with Philip's often heuristic treatises. It did really help. Reading Ochieng over the years starkly reminded me of Plato's own treatise on governance, in which he and his most eminent student, Socrates, espoused the idea of a philosopher king, the idea that the best form of government is that in which the philosophers rule. The story is long and you can find it in the Republic of Plato's book. Reading Ochieng's seminal book on the Kenyatta succession with Karimi and his own book, I Accuse the Press Later, his articles in the various publications, I came to the very obvious realization that in Ochieng, Kenyan journalism had the very rare embodiment of a philosopher's scribe. From his pen came thoughtful, deep, purposeful works not only served in Chinese of the English language, but also anchored in history, literature, and spiced with ideology and conviction. Fellow editors, I put it to you that the best newsrooms are those in which philosopher scribes rule. Unfortunately, our newsrooms today are packed with so many kings and queens, read scribes without philosophy, and conversely, a few philosophers without the ropes of kingship. Journalism certainly needed Ochieng's organized skills to make a mark in the sands of Kenyan history. A man who sought to direct the course of history through his thoughts and principles while remaining faithful to the very ideals of the fourth estate. Like many great thinkers before him, Ochieng was clearly a restless and a troubled soul, a walking contradiction of thoughts whose spirit wandered across the globe, perhaps in search of answers to fundamental questions around life and human existence. This is why, despite being a confessed atheist, he did not find it necessary to drop his name Philip, the very epitome of the Christian faith in his life. Ochieng was arguably one of the most well-read human beings within the boundaries of Kenya. Yet twice, he squandered the opportunity to be officially baptized in the world of letters. Philip was learned in matters African, cultural, Egyptology, and Greek mythology, but never regarded any of this as worthy of shaping his
Thank you, Rapuro. We have in the room Naim Bilal. representing our
Hello?
public broadcaster. And I just want to ask that we
As
go
a
back to
young
what
journalist,
Joki said. We said,
hello?
in the spirit of all that Philip told us, concise, brief, to the point.
Good morning, everyone. My pleasure in events like this, you get to meet people you hardly meet. Joe, I haven't seen you in a long time. Ross Lucalo, the same thing. Those who may not remember history very well, Ross Lucalo was my deputy in another life. And I'm always pleased to meet very many other friends I haven't seen for years. I'll be very brief. I know there is a lot has been said and continues to be said about Pio. It is difficult really to say enough about our departed colleague. But allow me to start by thanking KEG, Kenya Editors Guild, for organizing this event to reflect on our life and times as journalists with our departed colleague. Dorothy, before I go far, allow me to recognize you. I just walked in. We have heard a lot lately about Pio, and we continue to hear, in the newspapers. I was reading very interesting anecdotes, radio programs. Yesterday it was John Kamau, very wonderful, reflections, anecdotes you can associate with. I saw something from Mwangi Githahu writing from South Africa. And I must say, Philip touched most of us who all practiced journalism through the 80s and 90s in a very, very special way. He's a man who influenced journalism and politics, media and politics, in a very significant way in this country. Through his writings, book writing, professional and social relationships, Philip did make a very great impact. Myself, I moved from reporting to the subs desk without a clue of what subbing was all about in terms of practice around 1997, 1998. And I was placed under the tutelage of one Pio. Pio was taught or trained us with a couple of others on language use, grammar, diction, syntax, and editorial judgment as gatekeepers. And I must say that training was to carry us through our careers. Throughout, I've been in the profession now more than 3 decades. And a lot of what I have practiced has had a connection with Philip Ochieng and Joe Kadhi. Joe Kadhi's training was mainly in the mechanics of editing. Those who came into the scene after the 2000, you may not know things that used to be called editing signs and symbols. That was a language for editors that you had be taken through. I was a fan of Pio myself right from the 80s when I was in school, early 80s. I used to go to the school library and I would appreciate. Of course, I was deciphering very little about Philip's writing, but I used to admire his English, his ideas that were way beyond me. Little did I know that I would find myself under his tutelage in the fullness of life. I must admit here, and that's why I'm happy to be here, that Philip and Joe Kadhi did get me started in my career as an editor. The skills and knowledge, the expertise I gained from these two gentlemen and others, Joe Dindo included, Tom Shindi, and others, professional colleagues. It has really helped me throughout my life first as a journalist and now as a manager and leader at Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. We honor and celebrate a great man today. Pio, may you rest in eternal peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Naim. We're a little bit behind time, so I'm going to ask those who speak really to really keep it a bit briefer. I'm sorry to do that to you. We started a bit late and time is not on our side. If we can get Pamela online from Nation Media.
Good morning, everyone. Mutuma is online and he'll speak on behalf of Nation Media Group. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can hear from Mutuma.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right, okay. So let me first start by apologizing that I couldn't join you physically at the Stanley, but I think what the last 1 year has taught us is that there are many ways of meeting and there are many ways of doing business through the technology. So first, let me start by thanking the Kenya Editors Guild for organizing this session to remember, to reflect on the life of, as well as to celebrate Philip Ochieng, one of the best editors that this country has ever produced. And then also to thank all of you, my friends and colleagues, for participating and giving your time to this important process. I worked with Philip, I think, probably 98 or 99, thereabout. We were doing the same job. We sat in the same part of the newsroom. We had the same kind of, I think, personality in terms of an interest in books and an interest in language. I had a degree in grammar. Philip was self-taught, but a little bit more opinionated and authoritative. And we had very many interesting and fascinating discussions. One thing that Philip didn't teach me and didn't teach the other young editors around there, by the way, he really loved the company of young journalists. You know, he was always laughing around and playing around in the newsroom. I don't think Philip taught us anything about life, how to live your life and how to do stuff for yourself, because he lived uniquely. And I think he expected everybody to find a unique perspective for the way to live their lives. But there is one thing that we all learned from him, and it is an obsessive focus on professionalism. And I speak as a person who did the same job with him for years and sat at the same desk with him, not just seeing him in the newsroom, but attending the conferences with him in the morning and in the afternoon, and working on the same pages, working on the same stories with him. One, a focus on good writing. He was a fantastic writer, as all of you know, and he appreciated good writing, and he appreciated good writers. Two is, of course, editing. I'm sure you saw Philip walking around the newsroom, rehearsing paragraphs and weighing words and checking things and consulting and chasing reporters for this and that. It is editing as a process, not of expressing the values of the editor, but of adding value to the story and making it better, not proving that the editor is a better journalist or better at language than the writer, but staying true to the language, to the idiolect of the writer, but adding value to the story. Another thing, fact-checking. I'm sure if Joe is in the room, you remember the debate we had about the NAC activist, and how we arrived at the position that we were not going to insist on various things because the authority had already spoken. It's fact-checking, obsessive fact-checking to make sure that the facts were right and that we remain faithful to them. Style and good grammar. I don't think I've ever met anyone who is as obsessive about style and as obsessive about language as Philip was. He seemed to think about nothing else but the language that he used and how he used it. I must say, as I end, that when Philip was given an opportunity to teach us news writing at the University of Nairobi, the School of Journalism, he was a horrible, and he himself would be the first to admit, a horrible teacher, because he would be supposed to come and teach us news writing, but we would spend 2 hours discussing the minutiae of syntax. And this went on for a couple of months until we agreed, we the students and he as the lecturer. But this wasn't working. So can you please go away and let's see whether we can find another Ben Bella or some person like that to come and teach us news writing. But all around, a thorough professional, a fantastic man. I shared many interests with him in books, and literature and other movements, and we shall all miss him, and it's a terrible and tragic loss for our profession, and certainly for the nation, for which he wrote for so many years, and for which he devoted the most productive part of his life. So thank you very much, and once more, thank you for showing up to honor Philip, and for the Guild for organizing this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mtuma. I want to switch and interrupt that the tributes from the media houses, because we have Philip's nephew here. Jack Ochieng also cut his teeth in journalism, although he's moved on to other things. I've known him for many years and did not know he was a relative of Philip's. Jack, if you want to say 1 or 2 words, I just ask that you keep it very brief as we pay our tribute.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. My name is Jack Ochieng, formerly of the Media Max People Daily, and a relative of Philip Ochieng. My dad was also in the media. Robert Otani was a younger brother to Philip. And as a family, we are very happy the way the media fraternity has mourned a member of our family, and it has really made us very proud. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Kipkoech, thank you for your patience. We're just going to hear from Kipkoech Tanui, also, I want to say a protege of Philip. And if you're online, we'll hear from you now. We will
Morning,
wind
everyone.
up.
I have a multiple.
Yes, you are.
Am I? Okay, I'm sorry I'm a late entrant into this list, so I would say I don't represent the standard group officially. My boss, Rapuro, has given a clear indication of how
Salama sana, unaniona? Oh, okay, mimi sikuoni. Aha. Okay, sawa. Huku nigeuke, nikae huku.